We are here today with Jeff Gray from Gray Electric, and he is going to share with us some really valuable tips for buyers and sellers. I think electricity, obviously very important to be safe. We want to know some of the things that buyers should be looking for when they're looking at a house. So are there specific things as a buyer would be able to look at an outlet and say, oh, that doesn't meet code? Or are there specific things that buyers should look for when they're looking at houses?
Yep. Yeah, great question. So some of the things that are simple for a homeowner, prospective homeowner to look for, just take a look at some of the visuals. So do you see some burnt outlets? Go through and operate the switches and lights. Do they all work? If there's ground fault circuit interrupters in the house, press that test button and see if it actually snaps out and shuts off the power to it. So those are some simple things. Other things to look for, go down and look at the electrical box. Do you still have screw-in fuses? If you have screw-in fuses, well, that's a really old installation and might be something to be concerned about. Another thing would be something called knob and tube wiring, and we can get into that a little bit later. But what that is, it's an old original wiring source from the 1880s. And so that has single conductors that are ran 4 inches apart. So you'd see those running through the basement is a great spot to see those.
Okay.
Or in the attic. Most people don't look in the attic, but check in the basement. And so that would also show a very old electrical installation that should probably be addressed.
And would that be in the trusses in the basement? Is that typically where you would see that wiring?
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So you would see that ran on the bottom of the floor joist through the basement. Or if you do pop your head up into the attic, if it's not full of insulation, you'd also see those wires. So there's 2 individual wires ran about 4 inches apart. So it's unlike anything else you've seen before. The new wiring has a sheath around both of the wires, and this one doesn't. So this would show the really old knob and tube style wiring.
So I'm guessing that that's a safety issue, right?
It is. Yep. Okay. Yep. So with the knob and tube wiring, of course, it was great when it was installed in 1880 to 1940.
Okay.
So if you think about that, that is a very old installation. So you're 80 to 100 years old of an installation in a home. It was a good installation at the time, but what happens over the years is that the single individual conductors, well, they lose their insulation. So now you could potentially have a bare conductor. That's not good.
Oh, okay.
The other part is, well, homes weren't insulated back then. Well, now they're insulated now. And so if you have this installation and you start putting insulation on top of the individual wires, now you've got a problem. That wire can't cool itself, and now all of a sudden you've got something on top of the 2 wires that essentially connect the 2 wires together that are not supposed to be connected together. So that's where a larger issue comes in, is when you start insulating a home, which most people want to do, have an insulated home, and that's where the knob and tube wiring can really have some problems.
Okay. So as a buyer, you're looking at a pretty big expense to switch that over, to update that electrical, because you have to run all new wiring through the entire house.
Yes. Yeah. So that's the difficult part, is how do you eliminate that?
Yeah.
And so the stuff in the attic and the stuff in the basement, well, that's accessible. So that's easier. So that can be done. Now where you come into difficult parts is those wires then run up inside of the walls and through the ceilings. So you have a 2-story house. You have the ceiling of the first floor, wires up inside of the walls and through the ceilings. You can't physically get to those spots unless you start to open up some of the walls.
Okay.
So now someone has to remove the drywall, has to repair the drywall. So that's where you can really get into some difficult upgrades.
Right.
Necessary, but difficult, and difficult means expensive, unfortunately. So
exactly.
That's how it goes together.
Exactly. Yeah. And this may be an insurance agent question that I'm going to ask, but do you know, are houses with knob and tube wiring, are they insurable under today's standards?
Well, I've been told that insurance companies and lending institutions do not like to see knob and tube wiring.
Yeah.
So that's where some problems can really come in, as well as fuse boxes. So if you have the screw-in fuses, those are the 2 things for sure that I've been told. Consult your own agent, but that those can be some big issues.
Yeah. This may be a silly question, but I'm assuming that all knob and tube wiring would have fuses? Is that what they have in their?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
So you could have one without the other. So someone over time may have replaced their fuse box with a breaker box.
Okay.
But they didn't go through the time and expense to replace the knob and tube wiring. So
got it.
You're not going to necessarily, one doesn't go with the other.
Sure.
They were put in at the same time, but you could have one that's been replaced and one not, or newer wiring in an old screw and fuse box. So you'd have to look for them individually.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense.